Building upon the distinction between representation and compensation, it is now critical to explore the requirements and limitations of fiduciary duties that arise once a licensee formally enters into an agency relationship. These fiduciary duties are at the heart of real estate representation in Arizona and define the ethical and legal standards by which a licensee must conduct business. However, while these duties are absolute in loyalty and care, they are not without boundaries. The Arizona Revised Statutes, Commissioner's Rules, and case law establish both the scope and limits of these obligations to ensure that agents serve their clients lawfully, fairly, and within the professional standards of practice. Under Commissioner's Rule R4-28-1101A, every real estate licensee must protect and promote the interests of their client while dealing fairly with all other parties to the transaction. This rule sets forth the foundation of fiduciary duty. The duties include obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. Each of these is designed to ensure that the licensee acts with integrity and competence while maintaining the trust placed in them by their client. Obedience requires that an agent follow all lawful instructions of the client. However, this duty is limited by legality. If a client asks an agent to engage in an act that violates the law, such as concealing material facts or falsifying documentation, the agent is not only allowed but obligated to refuse. Under ARS Section 32-2153A3, engaging in dishonest or fraudulent conduct is grounds for disciplinary action, including license suspension or revocation. Therefore, the duty of obedience must always yield to the higher duty of legal and ethical compliance. Loyalty is the duty that demands a licensee place the client's interests above their own or anyone else's. For example, an agent must disclose competing offers if authorized, and must never accept any form of secret compensation or bonus that could influence their judgment. Yet, this duty is not absolute when balanced against the obligation to treat all parties fairly. An agent must not misrepresent facts to other parties in an attempt to serve the client's interests. Commissioner's Rule R4-28-1101 specifically prohibits misleading or deceptive practices in advertising and communication, ensuring that loyalty to a client does not cross into misrepresentation or unethical conduct. Disclosure is another cornerstone of fiduciary responsibility. An agent must disclose all known material facts that could affect a client's decision in the transaction, as required by ARS Section 32-2153A3 and R4-28-1101B. This includes disclosing property defects, title issues, or factors that could impact the value or desirability of the property. However, disclosure also has limitations. Licensees must respect client confidentiality and privacy. For example, an agent cannot disclose a seller's motivation for selling unless the seller consents, nor can they share a buyer's financial capacity without permission. The law requires balancing disclosure obligations with the duty of confidentiality. Confidentiality may extend beyond the duration of the agency relationship. Once the transaction is complete, or even if the agency is terminated, the agent must continue to keep the client's private information confidential, unless disclosure is mandated by law or authorized by the client. This long-lasting obligation reinforces trust between agents and their clients. However, confidentiality cannot be used to conceal material defects or mislead other parties. If an agent is aware of information that materially affects the property's value or safety, they are required to disclose it, even if it disadvantages their client. This distinction was clearly emphasized in Hill v. Jones, 1986, an Arizona case where the court held that a seller and their agent had a duty to disclose known defects, specifically termite damage, to a buyer. The court reasoned that non-disclosure of a material defect constitutes misrepresentation. Accounting and reasonable skill and care round out the fiduciary duties. Accounting requires a licensee to properly handle all client funds, deposits, and documents. Under ARS Section 32-2151.01a, brokers must maintain complete transaction records for at least 5 years and ensure all trust monies are placed in properly designated trust accounts. Reasonable skill and care demand that the agent exercise professional judgment consistent with the standards of the real estate industry. This includes advising clients to seek professional assistance when matters exceed the agent's expertise, such as legal, tax, or structural issues. This duty is reinforced by R4-28-1101K, which requires agents to recommend professional help when clients face issues outside the agent's scope of knowledge. However, fiduciary duties have clear limitations. An agent cannot act beyond the scope of their license or authority. For instance, drafting legal documents beyond pre-approved real estate contracts or providing legal interpretations violates Arizona Constitution, Article 26, Section 1, and may constitute the unauthorized practice of law. The Arizona Constitution, Article 26, allows licensees to fill in factual information in pre-printed real estate contracts, but prohibits them from creating legal instruments or giving legal advice. Additionally, in limited or dual representation, fiduciary duties such as full disclosure and undivided loyalty are modified. In such cases, the broker must act impartially, ensuring that neither client receives an unfair advantage. The distinction between single agency and limited representation exemplifies how fiduciary duties may be narrowed by agreement. In single agency, full fiduciary duties apply to one client. In limited representation, also known as dual agency, the broker represents both buyer and seller in the same transaction, with written consent from both parties. Under this arrangement, confidentiality is preserved, but undivided loyalty is restricted since the broker cannot favor one side. This limitation must be disclosed and agreed to in writing, as required by R4-28-1101F Review Summary. Fiduciary duties are the core of agency relationships in Arizona, defining how a licensee must act when representing a client. These duties include obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. However, each has defined limits set by law and ethics. A licensee cannot obey illegal instructions, misrepresent facts in the name of loyalty, or withhold material information under the guise of confidentiality. Legal frameworks, such as ARS Section 32-2153, R4-28-1101, and Article 26 of the Arizona Constitution establish these boundaries. Agents must balance fiduciary responsibilities with fairness to all parties and must avoid actions that could constitute unauthorized legal practice. Discussion: why are fiduciary duties not considered absolute in real estate? Answer: because each duty must be performed within the limits of law and ethical standards. An agent cannot obey unlawful instructions or conceal material facts. How did the case Hill versus Jones, 1986, influence disclosure obligations in Arizona? Answer: it established that non-disclosure of known material defects, such as termite damage, constitutes misrepresentation and violates fiduciary duties. Why is it important for agents to recommend professional advice? Under R4-28-1101K. Answer: because it ensures clients receive competent guidance on matters beyond the agent's expertise, protecting both the client and the agent from liability. Closing remarks. Fiduciary duties define the moral and legal compass of Arizona real estate practice. They transform a mere business transaction into a relationship of trust and confidence. Yet, with great responsibility comes defined limitation. An agent must always act within the law, maintain fairness, and uphold integrity, even when faced with conflicting interests. Understanding both the scope and the limits of fiduciary obligations allows agents to serve their clients ethically while protecting themselves and their licenses under Arizona law.